This guy is often blamed for igniting World War I. His name is Gavrilo Princip, and he assassinated the heir to the Austro-Hungarian throne, Archduke Franz Ferdinand. And just like that, the dominoes start falling. Nations quickly declare war on each other, and the world plunges into chaos. At this moment, the world is basically a giant powder keg, waiting for that spark. By 1914, almost the entire planet has been carved up by empires. The strongest, France and Great Britain. For years, they've easily conquered colonies across the globe, giving them wealth, resources, and the best armies. Meanwhile, Italian and German territories are weak and fragmented. But that's about to change. Italy and Germany unify into single states. To prove their might, Germany goes to war with France. Shockingly, they win, seizing Alsace and Lorraine, regions rich in resources. But Germany isn't done. They crave colonies. So the German Empire grabs territories in Africa, Asia, and the Pacific. The catch, they're not very profitable, since the best colonies belong to Britain and France, and sharing is not exactly on the menu. The British have a massive, dominant navy. It controls the seas and can strangle German trade at any moment. Germany knows this, so it builds its own fleet. Meanwhile, the French are already plotting revenge. In Eastern Europe, tension simmers. The Russian Empire wants to unite all Slavs under its rule. Russia has already conquered Poland, Ukraine, and Belarus. Now it wants to dominate the Balkan Slavs, who only recently gained independence. Austria-Hungary opposes this, a multi-ethnic empire afraid of falling apart, home to more than 10 different peoples. Russia's ambitions grow. It wants control of the Bosporus and the Dardanelles to dominate the Mediterranean. But the ultimate prize? Istanbul. The former Byzantine capital and birthplace of Orthodox Christianity, the main religion of Russians. Later, the Ottoman Empire takes the city. Once a terror to Europe, by the eve of World War I, it's a declining state, constantly losing wars to neighbors. And so for all this turmoil, two rival alliances form in Europe. The Allies, Great Britain, France, Russia, and the Triple Alliance, Germany, Austria-Hungary, and Italy. Everyone knows a major war is coming. The only question is when and how it will ignite. In 1905, German General Alfred von Schlieffen devises a plan for a lightning war, a blitzkrieg. He knows Germany can't fight Russia and France at the same time. So Schlieffen plans to bypass French fortifications through Belgium. He assumes Russia won't mobilize fast enough. Once France falls, Germany can shift its armies east and crush Russia. Germany is ready for war and just waiting. Yet the early 20th century is a time of economic and cultural boom. Theater, music, literature. Year after year, masterpieces emerge. Huge steamships crisscross oceans. Cars fill the road. The Wright brothers build the first airplane. Europe has never been more powerful, wealthy, or confident, so why would anyone want war? Because behind all of this progress is the relentless labor of millions of workers. Workdays are twice as long as today's. Conditions are brutal. People earn pennies and die in accidents. Workers strike constantly, and politicians think war will distract the public from these problems. Nationalism is booming too. Empires host many peoples. Irish, Czechs, Ukrainians, Finns, all longing for that independence. A great war could be their ticket. For oppressed nations, it's a last chance. Opposing war is now considered unpatriotic. It's seen as a test of a state's right to exist. Initially, this sparks local conflicts. One of the first is the Anglo-Boer War in South Africa. Think of it as a spoiler for World War I. 2 years later, another war erupts. The Russo-Japanese War. Russia loses. For the first time, an Asian country defeats a European great power. Around the same time, Germany and France clash twice over Morocco, but the situation never turns into war. The Balkans are also heating up. Serbia, Montenegro, Greece, and Bulgaria defeat the Ottoman Empire. Within a year, though, they fight amongst themselves. Bulgaria claims it got too little territory and attacks Serbia and Greece. Neighbors push back and defeat Bulgaria. The Balkans now look like this. Orthodox Serbia stands out. Like Russia, it wants to unite local Slavs under its control. To do that, it must take Bosnia, Croatia, and all Slav-populated lands from Austria-Hungary. Naturally, tensions between Serbia and Austria-Hungary run high. And so, the world approaches June 28, 1914. On this day, Archduke Franz Ferdinand arrives in Sarajevo. This is the edge of Austria-Hungary, home to many Serbs and Bosnians who aren't exactly fans of the empire. Yet the Archduke is fearless, driving through the city in an open-top car. Meanwhile, terrorists from the Serbian group Young Bosnia are preparing an assassination attempt. At one point, a terrorist throws a grenade at the Archduke's car. It bounces off and explodes amongst the police and the bystanders. One terrorist is immediately caught while the others escape. Franz Ferdinand is lucky. He's not injured. And after the attack, as if nothing had happened, he continues to City Hall for his scheduled speech. His advisor suggests playing it safe and returning to Austria, but the local governor isn't convinced. Do you really think Sarajevo is crawling with killers? The Archduke decides to stay in the city. After leaving City Hall, he heads to the hospital to visit those wounded in the attack. But along the way, the driver takes a wrong turn, and when he realizes it, he slowly backs up. That small mistake proves fatal. One of the 6 terrorists, who happens to be buying a sandwich across the street, sees it. Gallipoli Campaign. He rushes to the car and fires at point-blank range, killing Franz Ferdinand and his wife, Sophie. Gavrilo then swallows poison, but it's expired and he vomits. He tries to shoot himself, but passerbyers tackle him, wrestle the gun away, and beat him badly. Within the hour, Franz and Sophie die at the hospital. All 6 terrorists are quickly found, arrested, and interrogated. One confesses that the weapons were supplied by the Serbian government. Austria-Hungary formally accuses Serbia of murder. Serbia denies it, although the Serbian group Black Hand, supported by Serbian intelligence, was indeed involved. Austria-Hungary then delivers a 10-point ultimatum. Serbia agrees to everything except one demand, allowing Austrian police to operate on its territory during the investigation. They consider this a violation of their sovereignty. Austria-Hungary knew that Serbia would refuse. On July 28th, exactly 1 month after the Archduke's assassination, Austria-Hungary declares war on Serbia. And just like that, other countries are drawn in. The Russian Empire announces it will protect its fellow Orthodox nation and begins mobilization. Germany, Austria-Hungary's main ally, demands Russia stand down, but Russia refuses. So on August 1st, Germany declares war on Russia. Germany has only one plan, the famous Schlieffen Plan, and it calls for defeating France first. By August 3rd, while Russia is still mobilizing, Germany declares war on France. Italy watches but refuses to support its allies. They attack rather than defend, which wasn't part of the deal. The Triple Alliance is falling apart. Britain hesitates, but when Germany attacks neutral Belgium, everything changes. Britain has guaranteed Belgium's independence. On August 4th, Britain declares war on Germany. Old grudges and conflicts now merge into one massive global war. And the strangest part? The rulers of the countries that started it? All cousins. German Emperor Wilhelm II addresses the Reichstag. He says he did everything to avoid war, but the enemies are so treacherous that now the German army has no choice but to defend itself and strike first. Other nations justify themselves similarly. France, Austria-Hungary, Russia, Britain all tell their people they must fight to defend themselves. Yet none of them are truly on the defensive. The generals only plan to attack. Still, ordinary people support it. As soon as a country declares war, support for politicians and the emperor surges. Parades of celebration fill European capitals. There's a reason for this. The last major war was a century earlier against Napoleon. People read about it in books where battles were heroic and romantic, and the armies little had changed since then. So, 19th century war could be summed up like this. Soldiers march heroically in neat rows and die in messy piles. And that's how World War I began, without anyone realizing that new weapons would make those piles far, far larger. Heavy artillery would soon leave only a wet spot where soldiers once stood. Armies change immediately in size. Previously, wars were fought mostly by professional soldiers. Trained for years at military academies, they treated war like a science. Now, general mobilization brings in all sorts of men. Never before had so many soldiers gathered on a battlefield. Early war army sizes. After mobilization, often voluntary, numbers doubled or tripled. By war's end, armies became colossal. But it's still 1914 on the streets. In Paris, London, Berlin, people talk about how the war will be over soon. Soldiers smile for the cameras, they wave cheerfully to wives and mothers, they feel like heroes and promise to return by Christmas. On August 2nd, 1914, German forces occupy Luxembourg and demand that Belgium allow them to pass through its territory. The Belgians refuse, so the Germans attack, confident that no one will resist. But Belgium, with its tiny army, defends each city fiercely, slowing the German advance for an entire month. Eventually, heavy artillery is brought to the front, smashing Belgian fortifications, and the Germans push forward. Meanwhile, the British see this and rush troops to Europe, but there are too few to stop the Germans. The French, for their part, watch in disbelief, unable to imagine Germany would attack through Belgium. They assume it's some clever diversion. Even more surprising, the French army itself advances into Germany, but at the border, they run straight into German machine gun and artillery fire. Not only are the French attacking in the same neat rows, they're also wearing bright blue jackets and vivid red trousers, making them easy targets. After just a few weeks of fighting, the French suffer 260,000 casualties, and their offensive collapses. Finally, the High Command agrees to abandon the red trousers. Back on the battlefield, while France is reorganizing its army, Germany pushes through Belgium and attacks France. Meanwhile, Russia has completed its mobilization and is moving its army into East Prussia. The Germans are fortunate. Russian soldiers lack ammunition and proper equipment. Communication is even worse. With few radios or telephones, commanders often don't even know where their own units are. The Germans easily intercept Russian messages as the Russians fail to encrypt them. Soon the Russian Empire suffers a defeat in East Prussia. But further south, the Russians fare much better. They win in Galicia. Here, Russia loses 255,000 soldiers. But Austria-Hungary loses even more, 300,000 plus 100,000 captured. The Russians occupy Lviv, but only additional German troops from the Western Front prevent a total breakthrough. Moreover, Austria-Hungary struggles against Serbia, forcing Germany to divert some troops there as well. The delay in Belgium and Russia's rapid mobilization disrupt German plans. Yet they still can't be stopped. By early autumn, German forces reach the outskirts of Paris. Only 40 kilometers separate them from the French capital. 1 million Parisians flee the city, and politicians consider surrender to save it from bombardment. But French commander Joseph Joffre refuses. He gathers all reserves and plans a counterattack. To move troops faster, Parisian taxis are pressed into service. 600 cars transport 5,000 soldiers. Tiny in the grand scale, but morale skyrockets. By September 5th, the Battle of the Marne begins. French and British forces attack the exhausted Germans. German supply lines stretch thin. The Germans lose and retreat. The Blitzkrieg fails, though Germany still has a chance to outflank and crush the French. What follows is the race to the sea. Both armies try to outmaneuver each other from the north, but neither succeeds. By the end of the year, the front stalls. Soldiers dig in, creating an extensive system of trenches and concrete fortifications stretching 600 kilometers. The war becomes positional. No side has a clear advantage, and everyone looks for new allies. On the Allied side, Japan joins the Entente, seizing German colonies in the Pacific. The Entente also captures nearly all German colonies in Africa. Meanwhile, Australian forces attack German New Guinea. Germany couldn't protect its colonies because the British had blockaded their fleet, and they didn't want to break the blockade and risk their ships. The colony problem. Germany wanted to compensate by gaining a new ally. On October 29, 1914, the Ottoman Empire entered the war. Before the war even began, Germany had laid the groundwork. Germany had helped modernize the Ottoman army and economy, training soldiers and building railroads. The Turks saw German troops already in France and believed Germany would win soon, so they joined the war. Add that to their deep hatred for Russia, and the stage was set. They would clash again on the Caucasian front, but neither side scored major victories. The war now spanned 4 continents: Europe, Asia, Africa, and Australia. Everywhere, armies struggled to move forward. The hardest fighting was on the Western Front, where soldiers weren't just digging trenches, they were building entire underground cities. 3 to 4 lines of trenches twisted together like a maze. Inside, they built dugouts, kitchens, medical posts, and ammo depots. Ahead of the trenches, rows of barbed wire were strung tight and menacing. Beyond that lay no man's land, 50 to 500 meters wide, scarred with shell craters and littered with bodies. Behind it, the enemy's fortified positions. With defenses like this, battles became repetitive. Artillery pounded enemy positions by day, while scouts ventured into no man's land by night to plan the next attack. Then, one side struck, and that struck always began with relentless bombardment. Cannons hammered enemy lines for hours, aiming to destroy machine guns and rip through barbed wire. Then officers gave the signal. Soldiers climbed out and charged straight ahead. Horses and vehicles were rarely used, so the odds of survival were 1 in 100. Few even reached the wire, and if they did, they still had to climb over it and fight the enemy hand to hand. Thousands fell for a patch of land no larger than a football field. Days later, the other side went on the offensive, and the cycle repeated. Advancing even 2, 3, or 10 kilometers, that counted as a huge victory. On both sides, soldiers lived in filth and damp among rats and lice. Some lost their minds under constant shelling. Rain made life worse, trenches filled with muddy water. Soldiers lay wooden planks and sandbags, but it barely helped. They stood in freezing mud for days. This caused a particular disease, trench foot. If untreated, a soldier could lose a foot or even a leg. In these extreme conditions, strange traditions began to emerge. For example, one day, Germans proposed a temporary truce just to dry off in the sun. In some places, soldiers agreed not to fire during lunch. Moments like these revealed the absurdity of the war. Enemies they were supposed to hate turned out to be ordinary people facing the same struggles. On December 25th, 1914, Christmas Day, something extraordinary happened. The British heard German soldiers singing and saw candlelight on small Christmas trees set up on their positions. The British assumed it was a trick, but soon joined in singing. When the singing stopped, soldiers called out jokes and greetings. Across the front, officers arranged a temporary truce. The next day, German and British soldiers met in no man's land. They shook hands, exchanged gifts, talked about their families, and showed each other photographs. Now, not everyone welcomed the truce. Some used it to study enemy machine gun positions and fortifications. And the Christmas truce mostly involved British and Germans. The French and Belgians didn't agree. The Germans had occupied their land, and shaking hands with occupiers wasn't acceptable. Even German and British generals disliked the truce. They reminded soldiers this was a war. They were supposed to shoot, not hug. And that's how 1914 ended. No one went home. In the 5 months of fighting, 4 million were killed or wounded. And the war had only just begun. This is a propaganda poster from World War I. It shows a rabid gorilla wearing a German helmet stepping onto American soil. This poster would later become one of the inspirations for the movie King Kong. The Christmas truce showed that not all soldiers actually hated the Germans. And because of that, every country decided to ramp up propaganda. Newspapers began publishing stories about a so-called German corpse factory, where the bodies of fallen soldiers were supposedly processed into soap. The British wrote about a crucified Canadian soldier allegedly nailed to a board by German troops. This is where one of the earliest and most infamous wartime fakes was born. At the same time, every country justified its participation in the war with noble motives, defending the homeland, protecting small nations, defending democracy, and so on. The Entente even spread the idea that this war would be the last war, the war to end all wars, but above all, what really influenced people were motivational posters. The first of these appears in Britain. On it, the Secretary of State for War, Lord Kitchener, points directly at the viewer and says, "Britons, your country needs you. Join the army." The idea seems simple, but it's so effective that it is copied again and again. On these posters, the enemy is portrayed as a coward. Later, this trick would backfire on the soldiers themselves. In the very first battle, they realized that reality looked nothing like the posters. But even the best propaganda works poorly if there are no victories at the front. So, every state starts looking for a way to turn the war in its favor. In London, the First Lord of the Admiralty, Winston Churchill, declares that breaking through the Western Front is impossible. A new front must be opened in the Ottoman Empire. According to the plan, British ships would enter the Turkish Straits, destroy the coastal fortifications, capture Istanbul, and knock the Ottomans out of the war. The plan is approved, and on February 19, 1915, the British launched their attack. But they failed to account for one thing. The Germans have helped the Turks prepare their defenses. British ships hit mines, and from the shore they're immediately pounded by artillery. In these conditions, the only option left is landing. On April 25, 1915, British, Australian, New Zealand, and French troops land on the Gallipoli Peninsula. The terrain is unforgiving, narrow beaches, steep cliffs, and from the fortifications above, machine guns fire non-stop. The key figure of the Turkish defense, a young colonel named Mustafa Kemal, takes matters into his own hands. Without orders, he throws his 57th Regiment into battle against the British. It's then that he delivers his legendary words. "I am not ordering you to attack. I am ordering you to die. In the time it takes us to die, other troops and commanders will arrive and take our place." Every soldier of the 57th Regiment is killed. The Entente still manages to dig in, but it can't move forward. Soon, heat and filth trigger epidemics that tear through the army. It becomes clear that further advancement is impossible, and the troops are evacuated. The Allies lose 140,000 killed and wounded. The Turks, 250,000. After the failed operation, Winston Churchill is removed from his post, and the hero of the Turkish defense, Mustafa Kemal, will later become the founder of modern Turkey. Meanwhile, the Western Front stirs back to life. The Germans plan a breakthrough. On April 22, 1915, near the Belgian city of Ypres, they release 168 tons of chlorine gas against French troops. A yellow-green cloud sinks into the trenches and suffocates the soldiers. The French flee their positions. Out of 15,000 poisoned, 5,000 die almost immediately. At last, the Germans push forward, but reinforcements soon arrive for the French. Breaking through the defenses completely still proves impossible, and later, gas attacks bring no real results. Before long, the Entente figures out how to defend against German gas. Soldiers cover their faces with solution-soaked cloths that neutralize chlorine. Soon, the first respirators and gas masks appear. Later, the Entente develops its own chemical weapons. But by that time, the Germans introduce a new substance, known as the king of chemical weapons: mustard gas, a gas that burns human flesh. By the end of the war, all sides will use various chemical agents, but none of this will bring decisive results. At sea, there's little news as well. No major battles take place. British ships continue to blockade the German coast, and Germany is unable to import resources from abroad. Meanwhile, the Entente trades freely with the United States. The German command decides to use its one real advantage: submarines. German sailors call them iron coffins because they often sink. On top of that, the crews breathe a mix of sweat and diesel fumes, and due to constant dampness, mold grows everywhere. The conditions are, to put it mildly, miserable. Even so, the Germans sink thousands of Entente merchants and civilian ships. They declare the waters around the British Isles a zone of unrestricted submarine warfare. The Entente camouflages its ships with patterns and geometric shapes in dark colors. This kind of camouflage makes it difficult to tell where a ship is heading, especially when viewed through a submarine periscope, before you're spotted and sunk. Still, completely protecting ships from the Germans proves impossible. On May 7, 1915, Germany sinks the passenger liner Lusitania. Out of nearly 2,000 passengers and crew, 1,197 perish. Among them are 128 Americans. For the United States, this is a tragedy. They now see Germany as an enemy, but they still stay out of the war, for now. Meanwhile, the Entente is searching for a new ally in Europe, and they find one in Italy. The Entente promises Italy Austrian territories after victory. On May 23, 1950, Italy declares war on Austria-Hungary. A new and brutal front opens in the Alps. Fighting here is even tougher than in France. Mountains, freezing cold, and terrible roads. The front barely moves. But Austria-Hungary still commits massive forces, weakening itself against Russia in the east. Even so, Germany shatters Russia on the eastern front. Poland and the entire Baltic region fall. Bulgaria sees this and wants to side with the winners too. On October 14, 1915, Bulgaria joins the war. This is how the Central Powers take shape, a bloc against the Entente. The first to feel the pain of this new alliance is Serbia. They're still holding back Austria and Germany, but when the Bulgarians attack, Serbia can't hold and is forced to retreat. Soldiers and civilians flee through the snow-covered Albanian mountains toward the Adriatic Sea. Over 100,000 Serbs die from cold, hunger, and disease. Entente ships evacuate 150,000 Serbian soldiers who are later sent to Greece to regroup and reinforce the front. It may seem like those Central Powers are winning everywhere, but the Caucasian front tells a different story. The Russians are advancing. Here, the Turks blame the local Armenian population. Christians who support the Russian Tsar. Repression begins. First, Armenian soldiers are disarmed, and then the Turks forcibly deport all Armenians from the border regions. This is accompanied by pogroms and massacres. The deportations are carried out with brutal cruelty. People are either driven into the Syrian desert or loaded onto ships in the Black Sea and drowned. In total, 1.5 million Armenians die. This was the first time in history that an entire state systematically exterminated people based on nationality and religion. In fact, the very term genocide comes from this atrocity. World War I wasn't planning to end anytime soon. It kept claiming millions of lives across the globe, and while soldiers died on the front lines, politicians panicked because the economy was already collapsing. Everything was in short supply. Food, fuel, weapons, even people. Volunteers had run out. Everywhere, forced conscription began. This was the birth of total war, a conflict demanding the full participation of the state and every citizen. The idea spread that there wasn't just a military front anymore, there was also a home front. In Britain, they simply called it the home front. Citizens were encouraged to buy war bonds, factories were converted to produce weapons, and the government took full control of the economy and population. Authorities decided who did what, ration cards were introduced, prices were fixed, strikes banned, and free speech curtailed, all to make sure that nobody protested the war. Women took on jobs previously considered men's work. Their expanded role would later help them fight for more rights. The language of war changed too. Soldiers were now called human resources, and to the commanders, they were just numbers. A person was devalued, weighing the same as ammunition or fuel. Generals sent them on meat grinder assaults, and if they failed, they were just replaced and sent in again. This was a war of attrition. The Germans realized that winning didn't mean conquering territory. They had to bleed the enemy dry. That's how the plan for the Battle of Verdun was born. On February 21, 1916, the Germans bombarded the French for 8 hours before attacking. In just 4 days, the French lost almost all positions in the region. Their command rushed in another 190,000 soldiers and 25,000 tons of supplies. The Germans were finally stopped, but by a force 1.5 times larger. The battle dragged on, the front moving a kilometer or two one way, then the other. At one point, both sides even tried burning each other out with flamethrowers. It looked spectacular and terrifying, but accomplished little. And so, Verdun became the first battlefield not just for land, but for the sky. Before this, there were no fighter planes or assault aviation. Planes were primarily used for reconnaissance. Pilots from both sides sometimes even waved to each other in the sky. But soon, machine guns were mounted on planes and bombs were added for ground attacks. At first, this caused problems. Guns shot right into the propeller. But The Germans solved it first, inventing a mechanism that synchronized gunfire with propeller rotation. This gave them temporary air superiority until the Allies caught up. The most famous World War I pilot was German Manfred von Richthofen, nicknamed the Red Baron because of his bright red plane. By the war's end, he had shot down 80 planes. Mind you, a pilot was considered an ace for just 5 to 7 kills. He became a star of German propaganda, used to boost morale and intimidate enemies. Later wounded, he was ordered to stay grounded to preserve his reputation. But he defied orders, returned to the skies, and died just months before the war ended. Alongside planes, massive airships patrolled the skies, 150 to 200 meters long, like floating giants. Filled with light gas, they could climb 2 to 3 kilometers high. The German L-13 could reach London, drop bombs, and return without being seen, while Londoners had no idea who was attacking. L-13 killed 22 and wounded 87. Small compared to the bombings of World War II, but terrifying nonetheless. The enemy could strike anywhere at any time. To further unsettle Britain, Germany supported the Irish independence movement, supplying weapons for the Dublin uprising. How it ended? You'll have to check out our video on the IRA. You can find the link below. On May 31st, 1916, Germany dared to break the British naval blockade. The Battle of Jutland erupted. 151 British ships versus 99 German. The Germans fired more accurately, sinking 14 British ships, but lost 11 of their own. The gap seemed small, but Britain lost its best and largest ships. Had this continued, both fleets might have sunk, a scenario nobody wanted. So, the Germans withdrew to port. And of course, both sides claimed victory. Germany because it hit harder, Britain because it still controlled the seas. Meanwhile, the Battle of Verdun was still raging, steadily draining French strength. To take the pressure off, the British planned an offensive on the River Somme. On July 1st, 1916, the Entente assaults the German fortifications. On that very first day alone, 60,000 British soldiers are already dead. Taking part in the assault is a future English writer, John Ronald Tolkien. The charred battlefield he witnessed there would later inspire desolate lands of Mordor in Lord of the Rings. The same battle also marks the first appearance of tanks. 32 clumsy steel machines support the infantry advance and terrify the Germans. But the first tanks are deeply flawed. 5 get stuck in the mud, another 9 simply break down. The remaining 18 push forward about 5 kilometers. As a result, British casualties are 20 times lower than usual. Yet, by the end of November, the Entente has advanced only about 10 kilometers. In the process, it loses 600,000 soldiers. German losses total 450,000. Meanwhile, conditions ease for the French at Verdun. In addition to the British, the Germans are being weakened by the Russians. From June to September, the Brusilov offensive unfolds on the Eastern Front. The Russian army pushes forward 80 to 120 kilometers. Remember, people were fighting over 2 or 3 kilometers. Germany and Austria-Hungary lose nearly 1.5 million men, killed, wounded, or captured. This Russian advance saves the Italians from defeat in the Alps and forces the Germans to halt at Verdun. Around the same time, Romania joins the Entente and declares war on Austria-Hungary, but the Russian army stalls and fails to build on its success. Germany takes advantage, shifts extra troops east, and captures nearly all of Romania. On December 19, 1916, the Battle of Verdun finally ends, with no real result. The front line barely budges. By now, 6 million soldiers have already died in the war, and another 10 million have been wounded. The nations involved are exhausted and barely able to continue fighting. Germany proposes an armistice to the Entente. The Entente unexpectedly refuses. Looking at the map of Europe in early 1917, it's hard to understand why the Allies rejected a ceasefire. The Central Powers' armies are entrenched in France. They've seized a huge portion of the Russian Empire, and they're winning on the Southern Front. But from this perspective, the situation looks very different. The Allies have resources. Their colonies help keep them afloat, and when Germany announces unrestricted submarine warfare at the start of the year, the United States simply can't stay out. they declare war on Germany. The formal excuse is the Zimmermann Telegram, in which Germany offers Mexico a military alliance against the US. If Mexico agrees, they're promised back all the territory the states once took, but the British intercept the telegram and pass it along to the Americans. Back then, the US Army wasn't as strong as it is today. Mobilizing, training, and moving troops takes time. Germany bets they can win the war before America is fully ready. But Germany is on the brink of famine. Food is scarce. The average German diet now provides only 1,000 calories a day. Ersatzfood, substitutes, barely keep the population alive. Bread is baked from sawdust and potato peelings. Beloved sausages go vegan, made from soy instead of meat. Coffee, just a brew of acorns and chicory. And butter is replaced with margarine. Food shortages aren't just a German problem. Britain relies entirely on imports, and Germany's submarine campaign is cutting off supplies. In some cities, feeding pigeons is banned, and simple wedding traditions like tossing rice or wheat at the newlyweds as they walk are put on hold. Food is still abundant in the Russian Empire, but getting it to the people is a nightmare. Russian railways are worn out and clogged with military cargo. Wagons of bread sit for weeks on sidings while people starve in cities. In February 1917, bread riots erupt in Petrograd, the empire's capital. Soon, this escalates into revolution. Tsar Nicholas II abdicates, and the provisional government takes power, packed with liberals. They promise democratic reforms, but insist the war must continue to a victorious end. By 1917, the Russian Empire is falling apart. Finland declares autonomy. Ukraine forms its own council, and nationalist movements grow in the Caucasus. Everyone wants to decide their own future. Russia is no longer a strong partner in the war, and Germany seizes the opportunity. Meanwhile, Vladimir Lenin, leader of the radical Bolsheviks, is in Switzerland. He wants Russia out of the war. In April 1917, Lenin and 29 revolutionaries return to Russia, and by November, the Bolsheviks stage a coup and take power. On December 15th, a ceasefire hits the Eastern Front. Soldiers abandon their post, and negotiations begin. By March 3, 1918, the Treaty of Brest-Litovsk is signed. Russia loses huge territories, including Crimea. Germany recognizes the Ukrainian People's Republic as independent and promises to protect it from the Bolsheviks. In return, Germany receives grain and other resources to ease its famine. With the Eastern Front quiet, Germany shifts all of its forces to the Western Front, where nothing has really changed. The Allies keep attacking increasingly with tanks. The British dig tunnels under German trenches and blow them up. Losses reach into the millions. Soon, the French army is on the verge of collapse. Soldiers revolt and refuse to fight. France responds with force. Mutinous soldiers are arrested, and the most defiant are shot on the spot. Everything is settled by General Philippe Pétain, hero of the Battle of Verdun. He tours the mutinous units, meets soldiers personally, improves conditions, and the uprisings subside. Meanwhile, Britain plans new naval operations. Greece enters the war on the Allies' side, and troops are deployed there. Austria and Germany must reinforce the southern front. In the Middle East, the British push from Egypt into Palestine. In London, they seek the support of the Jewish population, Balfour Declaration, and the promise to create an independent Jewish state. That's how the Jewish Legion comes to be, helping the British take control of Palestine. Britain sends more and more troops to the Persian Gulf, rich in oil, aiming to secure it for the post-war era. From here, the Allies strike the Ottomans. Leading the charge is British intelligence officer Thomas Lawrence, famously known as the Lawrence of Arabia. He organizes uprising among Arab tribes against the Turks, sabotages railways, and attacks Turkish bases. The British capture Baghdad, Jerusalem, and Damascus. Meanwhile, as the Ottomans struggle, Germany makes its final push. On March 21, 1918, they launch an offensive on the Western Front, advancing 60 kilometers. Panic spreads through Paris. The Germans shell the French capital with the massive Paris gun, 30 meters long, capable of hitting targets 130 kilometers away. But Germany faces problems. Reserves are running out, American troops arrive daily, and the Allies prepare a massive counterattack. 2,000 planes, and 500 tanks, the largest concentration of armored forces in the war. On the first day, the Allies advance 11 kilometers and capture 50,000 German soldiers. This marks the start of the 100 Days Offensive. Erich Ludendorff and Paul von Hindenburg write to Emperor Wilhelm II, "The army can no longer fight. Germany is left alone against the Allies. Bulgaria and the Ottoman Empire surrender first, then Italy defeats Austria-Hungary, which lays down its arms." Chancellor Max von Baden speaks peace. On October 4th, he appeals to US President Woodrow Wilson. The world celebrates, but fighting continues, soldiers die, battles rage, and every inch gained strengthens a country's negotiating position. Germany's situation worsens daily. Sailors rebel, refusing to attack the Allied fleet. On November 9th, Berlin erupts in revolt. Wilhelm II receives a telegram. The German army will no longer obey him. He abdicates and flees to the Netherlands. Power shifts to the Social Democrats, who proclaim the German Republic. In a railway carriage in the Campaign forest, peace negotiations begin. The French demand Germany evacuate all occupied territories and surrender its fleet, artillery, and planes. At 5 a.m. on November 11th, Germany signs the armistice, effective at 11 a.m., the 11th hour of the 11th day of the 11th month. Fighting continues until the last second. Canadian soldier George Price is killed at 10:58. At 10:59, American Henry Gunther launches a final attack. The Germans plead for him to stop, but when he gets too close, they fire. Fortunately, such incidents are rare, and most fighting halts on time. A British corporal wrote, "The Germans came from their trenches, bowed to us, and then went away. There was nothing to do with which we could celebrate except cookies." Out of the 59 independent nations, 38 took part in World War I. 73 million soldiers served, 10 million died, and 21 million were wounded. Every minute, 4 soldiers were killed. Up to 10 million civilians perished due to combat, famine, disease, and genocide. After the armistice, German troops orderly abandoned their positions. They don't know what this will mean for their country. Everyone is just happy the war is finally over. German General Karl von Einem addresses his soldiers. "The hostilities have ceased. Undefeated, you are terminating the war in the enemy country." The German population had seen almost none of the destruction endured by French and Belgian civilians. But the Treaty of Versailles destroys Germany. The country is held fully responsible, forced to pay massive reparations and lose all its colonies, despite an already collapsed economy. Money becomes worthless, and veterans are shattered. Among them is Adolf Hitler, wounded twice in the war. Humiliated by Germany's fate, he turns to politics, setting the stage for World War II.